it's quite a long paper, so I'll try to just read the paper as is. This was first delivered in the Mabuhay Temple Conference for Cultural Pluralism in Buddhism. So the title is Characters in Search of Identities, Shared Disaster, Shared Realities on Ang Mga Bata, or The Children, the Children. Okay. On December 19, 2012, Terry Martinez, Kim Kilikot, and I were still unable to figure out a plan for a proposed radical adaptation of Luigi Pirandello's 6 Characters in Search of an Author, which went to pre-production hell through a couple of writers who either A, had great difficulty to churn out a viable script where the actors portraying oppressed characters are suddenly confronted by so-called real personas who oppose the theater company's depiction of their situation, or B, came up with a totally different script that had nothing to do with the concept. As morning crept in, we ended up throwing names in the air as to who could direct this non-existent play. Then, probably prompted by stupor, we threw out this notion: what if there was no director? Or more accurately, what if everyone part of the production were inside the play? No one is uninvolved in the performance. We were enamored by the idea that everyone would be open to questioning and that our social status, education, upbringing, and their relation to the everyday politics and society, especially those belonging to the lower strata, would be laid out in the open, and at the same time, ideally, placing the audiences in a plane of unease or resistance. It seems so staggering, the notion, and so frightening. It was one thing to go into a performance to openly interact with the violence of the gazes, but it was wholly another dimension to expose your politics, your empathies, your psyche, which will be subjected to judgment as being perverse or misconceived or otherwise. We thought any script that depicted the downtrodden would suffice, but it had to be commissioned in the hopes that the playwright too might also be under investigation. Ang Mga Bata by Eric Dasig Aguilar, which was commissioned for the purposes of the production, depicts 3 children who died in a landslide caused by an undetermined disaster, whether a powerful storm or earthquake, and their ghosts roam around in a muddy wasteland, trying to go beyond an invisible boundary that encloses them, trying to find their bodies and the bodies of their loved ones, and trying to reconstruct memories that may or may not be either false or theirs. It is the prevailing urge to seek out an identity through construction or fabrication of memories which is centered to the text. An identity all too important when we realize how these characters and the real people associated with them have been effaced by a catastrophic disaster, where they have suddenly become one with the mud. And it was in this understanding of the text and the nuances of each of the characters that the personal was triggered. The text informing the personal, and real disasters informing the text, and personal disasters informing the performance, and so on. We too were in fact looking for ourselves. In one of the rehearsals, an actor had succumbed into the memory of her own family as she delivered her monologue. And around the same time, another actor was also overtaken by emotion due to a memory of a loved one who had decided to leave the realm of the living under her own terms. These were considered breakthroughs, a cause for celebration, because these incidents are materials no longer delineated from the text, and what realities the text entail. And these interactions were meant to be exposed in the performance. For we have to come to realize that delineating ourselves from these issues threatens to alienate the subject matter even further. You might continue to grow accustomed on regarding the world one-dimensionally. What is the sense of delineating when we ourselves are already part of the socio-political landscape? There are glaring differences, yes, but they are interrelated, especially in this period when the multiplicity and interconnectivity of individuals and their ideas have become more apparent and readily available through technology. It was never enough to just present our bourgeois sensibility and shrug our shoulders, or to whine about bourgeois concerns, or to take on the bourgeois guilt. We were asked to confront the things that we profess vis-a-vis who we are. And what do we profess regarding the poor, the oppressed? And who are we really? Educated, sheltered, privileged? Can an actor confront their incapacity to comprehend a disaster not their own? Or are these disasters already shared? How do our own personal disasters relate to the catastrophe these children have suffered in real life? Could we even relate to them? How dare do we associate or compare our disasters to theirs? Or should we reframe these questions? How do we reframe these questions? Who's to say these questions are not to be asked? The theater seemed to be a perfect medium for discourse. As an actor slips into a role, there already lies a political debate, not just an aesthetical one. A construction of reality is indicative of the artist's involvement to speak as, or maybe for, another. Mimetically, in this case, you could consider the another as the victims. And this could also put into question audience's involvement in social change too. The audience member's role, whether in society and or the act of portraying a role, when one, for example, is confronted with a major disaster on television or internet, or even when encountering a beggar on the street, can be parallel then to a political dilemma of the actors in Ang Mga Bata, Ang Mga Bata. We are all coming from somewhere, but how does this relate to the subject in question, the subject of the play? These quandaries were what the production tried to expose, and that is why the performance is an outright attempt to raise questions rather than answer them. As to how we were able to expose this debate in performance, that is debatable as well. It is important to note that the procedure, no matter how imperfect it was constructed or arranged, or no matter how nebulous it seemed to process, helped lead the production toward a goal. In several exhaustive months, we had to face numerous challenges of the self and toward each other. The question of an actor's skill was laid out on a butcher's block, and the relationships between the players often reached high tension. Predictably, in fact, given the nature of the endeavor, the personnel has baggage. And to what end do you lay it out down? Do you lay it down for everyone? And how do we handle them? Often we were not even sure who we were playing or what we should be playing. We were often confused as to what was fabricated and what was real, or had great difficulty differentiating theater exercises and reality. Several actors had to leave the production, unable to handle the procedure at that time. Some, even in between runs, had to leave, given the unbearable weight added by the recent catastrophic typhoon. The question of integration is a vastly complicated one, and thus, for the sake of sanity and for gaining traction toward achievable goals, we had to stick to procedure overseen by the dramaturg. The procedure was heavily anchored in exercises, writing, and assessment. You can start by the most seemingly mundane impetus. What role do you want to portray in this production? Free writing compositions were done to map out where people are coming from and or their perspective on key issues on identity and catastrophe. At times, these writings became the text themselves, as discussed above, when an actress going into a routine of a normal rehearsal broke down when she was grabbing clothes that were supposed to represent the mud. She suddenly remembered her father, who died years prior, and she carried on the scene completely entrenched in the emotionally exhaustive memory. The director, too, was paralyzed by the sudden outburst of raw emotion. Both the actress and the director then have to step out of the scene, in that sense, of the rehearsal. The director and actress are now both participants of the production and are asked to write down what had happened. Writing emotions, opinions, and points of view down was a key practice to develop the performance and procedure. These are then developed or distilled into agendas, which could be treated as scenes outside the play. If the impetus is lost in the scene when repeated, we either try to find it again with different approaches or give the scene up. True, the actor and the self are integrated, but they should be able to differentiate the two. It is never easy though, even now, when participants are still looking for answers and meanings in the things we do in theater, portraying these characters, and they validly ask these questions given the procedure. Up to this point, we still encounter actors leaving the production, thanking the procedure for shifting the lens, but now have decided to look for answers beyond performance. The procedure, like the participants, is continually evolving. So goes with the exercises, which are built mutually. Each member is capable of initiating it in order to expose the procedure and or to mine out a possible scene. One of the first attempts were the interruptions, where actors rehearse a scene only to have them unknowingly interrupted by another set of actors upon presentation. The reactions were assessed and processed and gave shape to this procedure. Another was the critiquing the director, where the process of a usual rehearsal was opened up afterwards for interrogation by the observers. The director simply did not acquire notes, but also attacks on his attempt to misrehearse the scene. Ideas and entry points were identified and paved a way for participants to create exercises. These attempts on a constructive interrogation of the self and other variables, whether socio-political, cultural, and even theatrical, were utilized to build what were termed as agendas. These agendas were to become compounding text on the existing script. All of these agendas were prompted organically, and a constant mapping is done to place it effectively in the structure of the performance. Accordingly, all these agendas too were prompted by what the text triggered in the participants. The characters searched for their bodies and memories to have at least a semblance of an identity, in turn triggered the participants to search for their own identities. The script suddenly became too real for us, though strangely ungraspable and distant still. And the constant changing of variables inside and outside the production also called for a constant transmutation of the performance. Subsequent runs saw a stripping down, removal, and or reversions of agenda scenes. To put things into perspective, if we are to question held belief systems, it was inevitable that the players would go into limbo. To me, the production seemed to be still at odds with itself as of now, fully indicative of where we are as writers, theater artists, and even as theater enthusiasts in the Philippines. For a production that seeks to expose, it's still in its adolescent form, had to abide to a dramatic structure. This seems to be a striking result, as the nature of the project, the non-existence of a director, for example, where no one in the production is outside the performance, the notion of no longer delineating the text and the realities of those performing them vis-a-vis the audience who would be watching it, and its initial aims, like opening up to the audience to change the performance midway, or an opening to scrutiny of the thoughts and opinions of the actors and artistic staff, seemed to yearn for a post-dramatic theatrical form. According to Hans Lehmann on his book Post-Dramatic Theater, everything indicates the reasons why dramatic action was formerly central to theater no longer applies to post-dramatic theater. The main idea no longer being a narrative, fabulating descriptions of the world by means of mimesis. The formulation of an intellectually important collision of objectives, the process of dramatic action as the image of the dialectics of human experience, the entertainment value of suspense, where one situation prepares for and leads to a new and changed situation. If we have yet to attain such form appropriate to the performance, then perhaps it reveals our deep attachment for the dramatic form as of now. The idea of this kind of play is hardly new. Gunter Grass explored similar themes when he wrote The Plebeians Hears the Uprising, and also Peta did Isang Rehearsal. But since, as participants, we were able to go through a procedure, we were able to identify the process in itself already entailed a post-dramatic format. That was the glaring difference. The text has prompted who we are and where we are coming from, and how we relate to the occurrences of disasters, personal and national or international. By shifting the mode of script analysis to include different modes of creative investigation, the psyche and the social-political dilemmas of the participants revealed in the theater-making process were seen as findings, and thus not separate, but in fact integral to the performance. These meta-texts, if you will, became part of the text, or how incidents or scenarios prompted by exercises based on the text were developed into meta-scenes, or were they even meta in the first place? Or is this the way we should look at text now, as no longer stand-alone, to actually acknowledge rather than deny the baggage it carries with it? Though it was laid down as script later, the meta-text, or maybe intertext, was brought about by the procedure. In one scene in the performance back in October, the actor, Eric, burst out of the character he is portraying to question the nature of the performance, the procedure, and even the ticket price audiences have to pay. How could we appropriate such painful memories, painful experiences to create art? What do we have to portray? What right do we have to portray these characters? What comes to mind is what George Steiner said of Jorge Luis Borges. When Borges was asked to why he did not leave Argentina when it was under the tyranny of a dictator he himself compared to a Nazi, he retorted, "Don't be silly. Torture is the mother of metaphor." The famous German director and poet-playwright Heinrich Müller, the one they proclaim both as a successor of Brecht and as his most important artistic denouncer, had written these lines in his poem entitled Vampire. "Vanished is the power against which my verse broke like surf, rainbow-colored." The poem Vampire was written after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was nostalgic, in a way, how he expressed his art's yearning for a tyranny of the old order. And it could not have been more brutally honest. Art feeds on unnecessary suffering. It was what he chose to expose rather than hide the notion in a veil of condescension. Yet it is the act of exposing these notions that I hold as truly important, because it opens up discourse, just as Eric, the actor's dilemma and questioning should also open his quandaries up for debate, and as such provoking audiences to truly become active rather than passive. These endeavors are in line with Testiero's attempt to gain an identity as an independent alternative theater company motivated by investigation rather than commercial viability or purely aesthetic aims. And by investigation, we also expose where the company is right now in terms of skills, capacity, philosophy, and so forth. The existence of independent theater companies like ours is also a blatant reaction to the National Capital Region theater scene, a call to address a dissatisfaction. As the established theater companies move into the mainstream, the emergence of a counterculture is necessitated. And this counterculture should not only address what type of performance it creates, but also identify what kind of audiences they espouse, the active audience. Active audience does not mean audience participation, but an active audience goes into a similar rigor of mentally preparing for a performance just as the production does. Thus, an active audience is provided a license to choose a construction of a performance where audiences are free to resist and deplore just as they are given the chance to be enthralled or absorbed by it. Thus, the objective to entertain is put into question. It is also not a mission of a production to turn the audiences into a mob, for this, to me, is no different from an audience reducing discourse into sloganeering, and thus become still passive audiences. If a political issue must be seen in a multiplicity of angles, given the influx of information and massive deception, we can no longer espouse such passivity and one-dimensionality in both a constructed reality of the theater and from the audience. One has to question even the notion of what they are seeing in front of their eyes, which is the performance. One of the most emotionally charged denial of the production was the treatment of the script. Many question the assertion of the production team's realities into the text when they prefer to witness simply a play. The intentional didacticism of some parts, where the director and actor debate Adorno and Derrida, had made a certain audience member angry, commenting, "I just want to slap the director right across the face. Who are we to complain about our lives when others are starving?" Were reactions in the end prompted by the procedure to open the performance to resistance and at the same time taking into account the consciousness and social strata we belong to, and to where a specific audience, middle to upper middle class, are coming from as well. This notion may hardly be new, but in this period it has become more urgent. Again, versions and sources are coming from all different angles, almost all at the same time, and we are left to try to make sense out of the things that seems to have become all too senseless. Ghost offices around the Philippines pretending to be legitimate NGOs, the political tango the government is doing around the pork barrel scam, the theories circulating around Nur Miswari as a distracting tactic prompted by a particular senator, and the recent natural disasters that has greatly injured the country and exposed its faulty infrastructure. So who is scamming who? Then suddenly we realize what should have been long apparent. Yes, the world is never straightforward, linear. There are mass deceptions, a manipulation of perceptions, and the multiplicity of angles that must inform what theater should be today. And theater, too, should be under scrutiny, since it is too manufactured, rehearsed, planned, conceptualized, and theater, even in its seemingly apolitical in content and form, does make a strong political stance in its existence in our landscape. And this informs our outlook to the active audience, to an active theater. This is by no means an undermining of theater, but a challenge to seek out what theater could be and should be in the 21st century. The entire rigor to place everything in question, including the nature of our practice itself, through performance is in a sense a means to seek out a survival of theater for this age. I just wrote a very short postscript after this was delivered. Sorry. I wrote a postscript after it was delivered in Mabuhay. After the initial run in the latter half of October, we received an invitation to rerun the show at the end of November, which is in Karnabal this Saturday. But only around 2 weeks after our maiden run, Typhoon Yolanda struck, one of the worst storms in recorded history that claimed the lives of thousands of Filipinos in the Visayas. When we first convened for the rerun, we felt we could not carry on. One leaves for the sake of relief efforts and personal dilemmas, and many of our former participants were no longer available given scheduling conflicts. We had questioned everything before, but with a major earthquake that had already struck that region less than a month ago, and now the more destructive superstorm, we seemed unable to carry the weight the performance entailed. There is so little left, but whoever was left felt the impetus to attempt to make sense of all the senselessness. The attempt is the position needed to be taken because it is in the attempt that raises the questions for reasons beyond remembering, but to make these questions pressing now, here, and present, just as performance. Key roles were left to be unfilled, all indicative of our shared realities at this time of such sudden catastrophe so immense. We all belong to these shared disasters, and the questions we need to raise are more pertinent now, just as how the production should be ever pertinent each time it is done, ever transforming to the most present of predicaments.
Okay, we only have 25 minutes left for us. We want to be able to create a space for our friends from Prince Claus to come in. Is it okay if I ask you now if there is anything generally that you're feeling about the network, the kind of impressions you're having about us? I mean, coming from where you are, and I don't know if you're still having jet lag. I don't know. I guess. So from jet lag to disaster to a forum. So I guess this is the time. I'm actually really quite curious to know. And then from there, maybe the questions can be asked pertaining to his paper. And all of the paper, because you have eaten the time, then I cannot present my paper, Joshua saw. But it's okay.
Although I have a jet lag, I'm very impressed in the way you are thinking through what you're doing. It's really it's very thorough, I think, and very going to the essence of your work, and that's really important. I think that you stick to what you feel is urgent to do from where you're coming from, and of course the relation with an audience. That's very important. I like the way you think about the aesthetics of thinking about that, and it's really interesting to hear your discussion. She agrees.
Another question: what kind of a direction is Prince Claus moving into in relation to its idea of culture? Because I remember Prince Claus has this definition of culture. Culture is a necessity, or culture is necessary. The culture is a basic need. So is that sort of tagline or sort of a vision about culture? Is that shifting? Or is there anything that you're seeing specifically in Asia which is changing the way you are seeing these things?
The culture is a basic need. That's still our, where we work from. That's the essence of our work. And Prince Claus, the name giver of the fund, he always said that we don't develop people, but people develop themselves. So that's also very important in our work. And so we don't come and see, oh, that's a nice project, and we give them money. But it's really important that it comes from people themselves, and that the project we support, that it has a bigger impact than only for the organization or the person we support. So for the community, or maybe you can add something to that from your experience. Yeah, that's basically it. It's So we don't come like givers, and it's very important that you do the work and that it has a bigger impact than only you or your organization, and it's really important for more people in a community or in a country. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe just before we go to Josh again, to answer the question, maybe it's probably also appropriate for people to know that Transitopia, the company we started a long time ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, has been a 2-time Prince Claus grantee. So we got a grant from 2010, 2011, and then there's a grant that we got 2012, 2013. So which is actually, and most of the people here, the actors, are part of the video you will be seeing later on. So since there is no really specific person I can thank to say thank you for supporting us, I can probably just say thank you, because one of the most emotional period of our life was right at that point where we're supposed to be like, kind of giving up on the contemporary dance in the Philippines when we got that grant. And so it has moved us forward, and in fact, it has helped us, in fact, find a bigger urgency to do something else. Yes, I guess that's it. So, do you have any other question you want to ask our friends? Or we can also go straight to Joshua's paper if you have questions about it.
We recently supported 5 projects in the Philippines, and we don't receive so many applications. So I don't know, maybe you have ideas of organizations, or maybe they can find us, or I don't know, but maybe you can help thinking us with that.
We have been telling people about the Prince Claus Fund, and in fact asking them to visit the website. But it will probably take a little while for people to get used to it, and I think most probably the gap is about what kind of works are being supported. I think when you tell people about Prince Claus, the first question, who is he? So I think by virtue of its relationship in the Philippines, so then we kind of have to tell people about it. In fact, what I wanted to say was that when we got our first Prince Claus Fund, we were so amazed that it is an international institution who's interested with the project, and we wanted to find a local funding which can do like a sort of a counter fund to it. It was so difficult to find that. So, I mean, it means so much to us that, and sometimes, of course, kind of disheartening that it takes an international funding to find the merit of the project rather than for the local context to actually understand what it is. But I think it will take also quite a while because I think the country also has bigger questions, and I think the arts really has become like the last in the priority of everything else, unless that kind of art is bringing in money, which I think most of the mainstream theater companies now are really concerned about economic sustainability, which is really important. But we have been thinking, at least that's why we gathered these people together, is that sustainability is not only necessarily economic, it is cultural, it is creative sustainability, and it's all of everything that is also equally as important.
Maybe coming from looking at it, I was just asking, is it too much to ask if they can really argue, present us the process on stage? Because there's a lot about the rehearsal process which we've discussed during the forum. But which was difficult for me to marry while watching it. Looking back at the production and seeing, okay, so I understand, I get it, that was a process. I am really interested in the rehearsal process now that I've heard about the paper, but looking at the production, maybe that was what I was looking for, or I was feeling like it could have been. So I don't know if it's a different treatment. I don't know if that was really an intention, but that's how it got to me. But it's really interesting. Even the idea of because in the end, I took note about the idea of, again, audience being active in a performance, just thinking about it. When in the end, I was there were just lines that are being didactic or like intentionally see you. So next was shouting that, but there was no counter to that, and it was like saying so. It's a and me not being led there, I guess. So yeah. So
Was that the statement?
was that the statement?
Actually, a lot of us disagreed with yung
Because she
Yes.
was carrying the megaphone.
Megaphone.
And she had the loudest, so that was like the last thing I remembered.
Yeah, it was the most vivid, I guess, a very strong image that ended the play. Just
And that's also the most of the response that we got. I think at some point it's really a question of whether you wanna keep it as close to the experience, or again also kinda create a counter to that, because the counter actually did not happen. And there is a really big factor of time. You know, that's one thing that we have been realizing, that the temporality of processing something is really as important. So then you also kind of want to say that no play is actually really finished, so that in fact, because now that we're performing it again on Saturday, it's going to be completely different, only because the actors are not available. So in fact, maybe if you want to see it, you can see it as a sort of a diary of a rehearsal. In fact, maybe in that way it becomes more like what it is. But it is nothing there was planned. That what you saw, hindi, dun sa last run, nothing was planned. Those were really like found experiences, if you wanna call it that too. And then you have brought all these found experiences together
But they were
as part, set up a week before. Yes, but they were part. They were not manipulated to made. They came because it's a 2 months of a rehearsal. So they were like a month and 3 weeks of experiences, and then you gathered the experiences, and then you kind of structured the experiences.
Who decided when he would interfere?
Based on the reactions per rehearsals, so something would happen to Joshua, and then we think that reaction can actually be connected to this text, because it creates a kind of a meaning there. And then this text can actually be a relationship with Joshua by virtue of their real relationship in the rehearsal.
But so I was looking for, because you were like saying that this is like exposing rehearsal processes, right?
So I was looking, because you had a dramaturg, I was looking for that dramaturg in that performance, because obviously he had a big hand in it, because you didn't have that director. And also, one of the things that did you question how you portray children as actors? Did that come into the process? Because I didn't see it in the performance.
I think that's the complexity of really allowing your actors. It was a big question during the first. In fact, there was a workshop. In fact, there was a big insight that if you're doing devising works, creating new works, you need actors who are actually highly skilled. That's one realization. And so, like, I think for about a week, we were workshopping people so that people can kind of go there. But I guess in the end, the priority is not also the representation of the children, but more like how the ideas are actually emerging together with the text. So then the idea of performing the children becomes a second priority rather than the thought of the whole thing. Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, actually, we also had very difficulty how to title it in the first place because it was a big dilemma because there was supposed to be a subtitle. We couldn't think of a good one, or we couldn't really place it, and that is indicative of where we're coming from in procedure-wise. Kasi the questions that JK raised were the constant questions that we came up with. But in the procedure, we cannot just impose that idea where, in fact, we cannot impose that idea if it did not stem from what we were doing. So we said, okay, let's put this in. Then we said, but it doesn't fit in. You just impose this this result into the play without really thinking about where is it coming from. So if we cannot solve this yet, given, syempre, you can always say about time and rehearsal and the capacity, which are very, very important variables.
Part of the procedure is the time element.
Yeah, the time element and the exhaustion, I guess. But process-wise, relationships, process-wise, we did not fit it in just for the sake of resolving an answer, resolving a question. I think we chose not to. So with regards to next, when she came up with that, or when that was when that came up, we had I personally had a resistance to how she was trying to end the play. I really felt it was like a rally. And I guess that was also indicative of where I was coming from. That I did not really openly try to do something about it. We could have churned out a scene to resolve it, pero ayaw namin, kasi you're sticking to a procedure, you're investigating. We won't want a cop-out in a sense. I don't know. That's what I also really admitted in the paper. It goes to show almost of a nostalgia to that form, and that was a big hit to us. Why?
The first choice is that you kind of allow that kind of a sound in the voice because it's really the reality of this period. The reality of the period is that people are waking up to the idea that we can all articulate what we want to say, and that is the point. In fact, aesthetically also, that this period is really noisy, so we kind of like thought, then if that's what it is about, then the noise is part of the text. The noise is part of it. And then, of course, in the end, you realize, yeah, that's true, because I think that the beauty is that when people start watching, you also kind of realize the weakness of your own, the structure of your own thoughts. And that, I think when Manny watched it, Manny said, but that sounds so 70s. Na sinets yung nag-end. When in fact, if you really want like a shift in that idea, dapat lahat maingay na siya. But of course, in the end, umabot dun sa ingay di ba? I think that kind of multiple voices was kind of there. So that's kind of an aesthetics that it wants to.
But also to put things into perspective. Kasi kahit yung mga tao that were emotionally I don't know, involved or who were emotional about it, to also put that into question. Lahat naman whether good or bad, procedurally. Kasi titingnan mo kasi ikaw yung gumagawa ng proseso. If you're the one doing the process, you would think, you would look at it that way on how you dictate the process. Because you built it. If you built it, then you look at how are they reacting, even the good ones, but in what frame of mind nila na-frame yung reaction nila. It's just that...
yeah, but this is a process that wasn't shared with the audiences. So are we saying that the performance will really be requiring another talk that will explain us through the rehearsal process?
Initially. So now that Joshua is reading the paper, I'm thinking, wow, that's more a performance than the, in a way. But yeah, I mean, in the end, that's what you are realizing in the complexity of it.
And you need to acknowledge that so you can really look at it and if we do it.
In fact, I also have a big question about didacticism there, because to me, it looks didactic, but if you don't know the procedure, it will sound didactic. But if not, diba, yun na nga eh. So, then in the end, you're saying that is people finding it didactic only because these are things that people really want to say. So, diba? Because these are, every person who says their own thoughts in the play are theirs. It did not come from anyone else. When Next said, unahin muna ang tao, that's really her line. No one prompted her to do that. So,
Exactly, but then you gave her the megaphone.
And still, they were actors. They were
Actually-
They were actors, they were
They were
performing.
imposing a message.
yes.
There was this
No, we're not
this
naman
kind of
denying all
performance.
those layers eh. Yes. Then we're saying all those layers are part.
Yeah, so it was part of this didactic
Yeah,
system
so
that
it-
came to the
that-
audience. That the
Kaya
audience.
yun yung
You mean as the
Yeah.
effect?
Yeah.
As the
Yeah.
effect. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, when we finalize the kind of structure that we would be presenting.
Last
In the
night,
end.
nabago pa natin.
No, that's when I broke down because I said, is there really how we're going? I mean, after all we went through, are we coming to? I mean, so it's really. I mean, it's really like after we all went through, then Eric is. I mean, Eric's argument is all parang really very valid. That I mean, let's stop this production because I mean, that's why I broke down during that last rehearsal that we had, and actually they were saying that maybe this could be a new agenda that I could put in. I mean, a new alternative, a new option or voice that could come in. But I said, I mean, when really the process would be never ending. I mean, you will. I mean, and maybe that's where the attempt to structure the process comes from. The fear that, I mean, you will really come to a performance where you're not really sure what would happen. That you come in there and then because people are always coming from experiences that happen, that take place every day, you might come up with new agendas, and some agendas that you might have had before might no longer be relevant, and you would drop them. And so what becomes of the performance in that sense? I don't know. That's
So let me clarify lang. So the point that you didn't address that adults playing children as actors or ano, because it was the glaring thing that we would see the whole time, right?
I
Because
think
it
na-
didn't come out na. Because you were saying that
no,
it
no,
was
no.
coming out
It's not
in the
appropriate
process.
to say that
Um,
you did not address it. You address it, but in the process, you realize that it was not the second priority aside.
So there are two things that happened in the procedure. First of all, it was many things actually. First of all, we did not, the procedure took a lot of time to take shape. Even the fact na nandun na kami, when we were on the space, we were presenting it, it was still evolving and it's still continually evolving. That's one. So that's the second thing is, we did not know how to first initially approach what to do with actors going into this script. So we decided, okay, maybe I could take on the role of a director, then rehearse a set of actors. Then we tried to highlight. At the same time, the procedure was happening and there were exercises going on. So there was a split. There was a split between going this to that. That's why I was reiterating that in the sometimes overwhelming confusion of where you're coming from. Who are you really in this production now? Because you go into this rehearsal, you rehearse, oh, my concept is this one and my concept is that one. You are supposed to not deny that you're adults, because clearly you're adults, you're not kids. So we're going to highlight that. But at the same time, okay, we have no more time, we have to go into a procedure and do exercises. Then we have to assess, which takes about 1/3 of the entire 6 hours or almost 8 hours of rehearsals 3 times a week. So I'm exposing that is what is really lacking.
Actually, seeing it now, it might be interesting to superimpose your paper to the performance because that might address that. I mean, that's probably the next phase. So that's also the thing. That's what we're realizing now. So doing this kind of work are phases of that work. So it's like, all of a sudden it becomes like, mga bata is one platform. Mga performance. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, until it gets into something probably that is closer to what it really wants to be eventually. But even if it doesn't get there, I think it's just interesting that it's happening that way, because we realize so many devices and then perception shifting experiences in the whole thing.
Well, that's good for the company, yeah. But I mean,
The question is the
so,
audience.
I mean, in terms of the audience, like,
I think that's also, negating the importance of a director is also, I'm sure not negating it, but in trying that experiment, because the director is important because he sees it from an audience perspective, and that's also very important. Meaning
also
making.
kind of contentious that a director is saying it from an audience, right? Because usually what we're used to are directors having their own vision of a play. It's not necessarily the audience. In fact, if you ask me, it's the dramaturg most likely, which is
Then the dramaturg should also go and see that this meaning making is not effective, and this is, and at the end, when
that's
you
also
are
contentious
shaping a
as to say
performance,
which
it
ones
has
are
to be
effective
shaped.
and which ones are not. I think what we have given up on this play is to say, hindi natin hinahanap kung alin yung mas effective by virtue of its effect, but we're trying to make the procedure and put the procedure, the product of the procedure, because at this point it's the product of the procedure that we can only hold for now, and then maybe later it might shift.
Kasi ang major talaga namin, yung panindigan when it comes to the sticking to a procedure is, can we find a cop-out to address this question? If it's going to be a cop-out, then we felt that it was cheating the audiences even more.
Yeah.
Rather
What do you mean
than
by cop-out?
for example, if we want to address how would you call it? The Ian or the actors playing these kids, but they're adults. Then okay, let's put this concept in where they suddenly jump out and say this and that line, and they would express where they're coming from. Maybe if it did not come out organically based on the procedure, we would not put it in, because that would be a directorial concept. Na I have this concept in mind to solve this problem, but it did not come from you. So okay, I'll put that in, etc. We'll discuss it if we could work it out. But if they're not, I mean, you can always say suggestions, but if the actors don't say, if the actors say no, it doesn't make sense, or why would you make me talk this way? Why would I say it this way or that way in this part? It doesn't, so we won't do it.
So I think the consciousness that there is a procedure happening, or even the idea that it is undergoing a certain procedure while you are performing it, and the very idea that by the time you perform it, it's already a party set, tama ba? A party set, plot points when you're performing it.
And it has a very dramatic structure. I mean, it kind of say that we're trying to be post-dramatic, etc. But that is what I confess. It seems like it's stuck to a regular plot structure, and we do not deny that. But I think that it was necessitated given from where we are all coming from, in terms of a company, in terms of scale, in terms of readiness. It was all there.
Proud to have this in that process. You're questioning your ability to act as children. Kasi because it's the title and the actors are the first thing that we see.
Yeah,
So,
but maybe in the next version, but you see, even before we get there,
We need to-
first problem is really going to the rehearsal, not having money to pay for transportation, and a director wants her to do all these things. Now, weigh it down. Which one do you want to discuss first? The inability to do the character, or the actor's inability just to make sense of why she's doing something when her life is actually disintegrating? It becomes even more insensitive to talk about performing the act the
Why
character
do we talk
because
of
she has a,
insensitivity now?
no, because no, that's what I'm saying, because that's what the actor is bringing in.
Because had we known that, then we could have
Yes.
chosen.
Because-
But we
because-
haven't.
Yes.
Because even after the talkback during the show, because that was the only thing we watched, everybody was talking about revealing the process, and the performance is the process. So what we saw, we took it as, oh, so that was your process. But then I got confused there because right now, after even hearing it, I think that revealing the process is different from performing a documented process, and that was what I thought about it. For me, it was like you were playing characters named after you perform, and I think I got lost there, given from the because yes, but it gets confused now when you start talking about revealing the process because it's so performed. So like the true process is not.
Isn't it that in the end it was really the chaos of it, because it
The chaos
was
of
chaotic.
what?
The chaos of the whole
Chaos
picture.
of. But I didn't
It's the
see it.
chaos of the whole text.
Well, now that I see it, it's just I see a chaotic performance, but not the chaos of the true process.
You obviously got together and decided we're gonna set it a week before because you came up with
we
a
did
show.
not say that.
That's what he
Yeah.
said.
Yes.
So because and then it would have been a breakdown of that.
No,
Then we
but
would have
see,
seen
but see what we're saying is that read it as that it is even an exposure of our own thoughts. Now, what is happening is that to me, I think you're still trying to read it as a regular play when in fact the play is already being read as it is. All your questions about it is really what it is.
I pointed because it felt like a regular picture as Abinus said.
You were trying to
Felt
read
like a
it from a
regular
different
play.
perspective,
It
like
felt
reading
like-
your
it felt like a
process
regular
based
play.
on
It
the
felt like it's a
performance.
Yun naman yung intention.
Hindi yun yung intention. Yun yung nangyari. Yun yung nangyari. Iba yung intentions na nangyari. Yun talaga eh. Kasi afterwards, sabi natin, it's the same. I mean, may dramatic structure pa rin siya. That's what I exposed in the paper.
So maybe what you're trying to say is that so we still cannot get out of it. Even now, we've learned it. It was so difficult. You're conditioned to actually see your life that way. I think, and to me, that's a much better way of exposing that. To me, that makes it what it is.
But now I think that what you wanted to happen, what you wanted to say as a company, is far different from what was felt.
Which is probably also what.
So
it
does
should
this
be.
cater to specific audiences?
Maybe. I think eventually talaga namang it looks like you're really parang also creating different sets of audiences for different works. I don't know if that's how we want to see it.
Sarah just said is actually part also of the procedure. If they felt something different, or they felt, that's why we were very critical on the good ones and the very bad ones. We took it as what did we do that created that effect in that sense, and we tried to, I don't know, solve that in our brains.
Your brain is really such a strange thing to work.
I just felt like in a laboratory that the audiences were necessary to come up with an experiment that will just be, the process among artists ourselves. And I don't know kung how much engagement it
Actually, it was a very big question because I also referred to many ideas where we would have a platform where the audience could change the performance midway. As in, they would imply that what we want to see is that, for example, the kids, why are you portraying the kids like that? They shouldn't be like that. Then the actors would change their attack on them, a change of performance midway, and they could even change the plot. But we said, why are we inserting this now? If it doesn't really make sense, if we cannot find a device from where it comes from, given all the variables, we cannot do it yet. So that's why it's continually transmuting when I refer to that. And given the instance where people left, we had to work with that.
Case of trying to rationalize the procedure, but it's just sharing that that's really what transpired and what came out out of your own intention to really keep the process.
In creating new work, for example, for Batalla with us, that's what we realized. At the earlier stage of the work, it was like us artists being the scientists, setting the parameters and doing it with an audience and allowing them to respond to that. And then eventually we got lost in the process, and we are eventually part guinea pigs in this whole experiment. And then eventually we have to reclaim that position where we can we can still look at it from an objective point of view, or from, I don't know. So even that the ethic, because we constantly question the ethics of theater making, of course, that's part of it. Like, okay, we can just do this really and test it and really understand it on our own, but not and we will be needing this much people just to address what we are thinking about, or our immediate thoughts as artists. But I don't know. It's a vague question, pero parang may ganun lang na feel kasi nangyari na rin, may ganun kaming naramdaman eh. Napunta rin kami sa ganung stage where you felt like kinasangkapan lang ba natin ang audiences natin. Tapos tayo, it's just us processing this right now. And this processing is not being shared, and or even the procedures are not even revealed. But we stick to like, no, keep the wings in the eye, because that's a different, it's still a different agenda. So
I think why I got lost in the performance, because that was where I was coming from, and it was a conscious intention
To not present the process and not say that it's a presentation of a process, because that's a totally different thing. And we got suggestions that then you should have told us blah blah blah, but that's a totally different agenda. So I think I got lost here, because during the talkback, Baking Mabuhay Temple, it was expressed that this is a presentation of our procedure. But then so many things that I hear now that you went through, etc., were not there.
no, because you cannot really practically put all of that.
But syempre, ethics
ang
din
sinasabi
ng tao
mo,
na
ang sinasabi
gusto
mo,
nilang i-present.
so it's
Yeah,
ang sinasabi mo, yung part pa rin siya ng procedure talaga. This is really part of the procedure kasi part naman talaga siya ng procedure. Pero, syempre hindi mo naman maipapasok yung lahat, di ba?
Yeah, so we're relieved. It's very relieved.
Yeah, but I think
Pero valid rin naman yung...
Well, I think it's also keeping a good range of what to include to make
And what
it
to exclude.
Exactly, because it's still a theater performance, and it's speaking to generate this feel of reality or whatever.
there was
But then I think then that it was
curatorial work. I mean, you cannot say it's not curated because it was curated heavily by virtue of what could be staying in the procedure.
Kaya ka baka dapat
Kasi yun,
So
at saka
it's
yun
a
talaga
different
yung kinaya ng curation niya. I mean, to accept that that's what that curation or dramaturgy has found by itself. I mean,
And
to
also
see
I
life
think-
that way.
Also, I think that was motivated by also the sense of responsibility towards the audience. Because I mean, if we really leave it to chance, I mean, given that acknowledgement that with the state the actors are in terms of perhaps skills-wise, commitment and openness. To really open up the whole performance to the process in front of an audience. That fear of what would you have? What would you have in terms of a performance where everything really is open to question?
Which is going to be another.
That's the idea. We would have wanted to get there, but again, during the process, that's what we found out that in terms of we're not yet. We're not
Okay.
there.
So, sorry about curating and because it's a question with me still. It's like working out, of course, reading books, still problematic about what dramaturgy is and how is it different from directing and Because, so yun yung confusing to me now. So I'm still just working it out. Because, you know, drama, of course, a drama is with a text, with that, and meaning making, but that's also partly a director's job, right? And images that you present can be defined like a work of the dramaturg, but also of the director. And yun.
Actually, when we got to talk to Vicker, Mikey Vicker, yung president of the Performance Research Institute. But anyway, her gist one, she didn't even really know too. Actually, there's actually a big debate over in Europe what dramaturgy could be. So that confusion is actually shared by everyone. So she said that if you think that a dramaturg is this person who just do research on the period, etc., that could be considered a dramaturg. And if you think a dramaturg makes out this is supposed to be this clairvoyant figure who would determine choices, what would they do in your production? That is also considered a dramaturg.
So it was just like a call, just making meaning,
It's
right?
also
Because you remove the director, but you have the dramaturg.
So there are dramaturgs and the directors.
No, I know. I mean, that's done, right? Dalawa. So you, because then the curatorship came from the dramaturg?
To me, it's not necessarily a difference in people. It can be one people doing all these things.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, and in fact to me, it's not even a question of who the idea is coming from. In fact, when we did the work, the ideas are really coming from everywhere, and ideas are coming from before the rehearsal, outside of rehearsal. So I guess in the end, if you say that the director is the dramaturg because the director already has that kind of a sensibility, then that's what it is. To me, it doesn't have to be, you know, cut and dry. Who is this? Who is this? Who is
No. I'm
because
just trying to, because I'm working out what the dramaturg, I'm studying that, what the dramaturg is.
Yeah. So
yung, because that your paper said doing away with the director.
No. Let me clear that.
and we have to wrap up. Sorry.
That was the impetus to create the production. That night, December 12. Siyempre, nung nangyari na, everything went in different directions as
Did
well.
you realize that you need a director?
There were many instances, yes, of course. Yeah, it's not just something that you can just
I think that's
remove.
in perspective, because it's just, of course, as a director, they would always say non-director, but we're saying multiple direction. But everyone is directing everything, multiple, right? In fact, the way I'm framing it, it's a multiple creation.
Yeah, the multiple creation is, you have a director, you're not saying that you only have one creator.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So if you have a multiple creation, why do you even have to ask who's the director?
I don't know, because that's what he said.
And that was just the impetus to create the production. It was just a notion. But your arguments that go into that na eh.
We have the capacity to...
I mean, we have to let go of that concept.
Para to us kasi, in practice, of course, it's multiple creators and all that. But in the end, when it comes to crunch time, one has to step up and say, ito na. This is what we talked about, this is what we decided. So yun na yun.
But I think not every company.
Yeah, exactly.
We do it differently than
Iba-iba talaga yung procedure. And I think that's to close it, sorry. We have to close it.
To close it, I guess, the important thing, I think, for this afternoon is to understand that we are able to actually also, like actors, be vulnerable to understand each other's processes, because really, in the end, that's the first and foremost the reason why we have started the Performance Research Network. And I think also at this point you realize that, to me, I am really more concerned about what are my thoughts, what are the weaknesses of the structure of my thoughts, and in fact, the more I realize it, the more I realize that in the end, that's why you need people to actually work with, because your own perspective of things is really, really too narrow. I mean, so parang yun siya. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for allowing yourselves to be also exposed into the same way that we're exposing ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. See you around. See you around.